Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Coffee with Craig, where we talk about all things firearms, firearms policy, politics, culture, media, you name it. We're talking about it right here on Coffee with Craig. So please take a moment, like and share the program so that your friends can join in the conversation. Also, if you haven't already done so, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. In the case of Instagram and not Instagram, in the case of YouTube and Facebook, make sure you hit that notification button. That way you'll get notified as soon as we go live, and you can participate in the live chat as the program is taking place. Also want to encourage you, please visit fpcgear.com. That's fpcgear.com. It is the place to go to get all of your Pro 2A swag. I'm talking t-shirts, coffee mugs, hoodies, tank tops, stuff for the home, stuff for the office. It's all there. And the best part about it is every dollar that you spend goes right back into the fight for our right to keep and bear arms. So you can support the Second Amendment and you can look good doing it. That's fpcgear.com. All right, you guys know we've been talking a lot about the war on home builds, on the ability of individuals to be able to manufacture firearms at home, which has been a tradition, well, ever since firearms were first invented. Well, there's a new take in Syracuse, New York, where they're actually encouraging people to report on their neighbors if they know anybody who is building these quote unquote ghost guns, right? You guys see my t-shirt? This is a ghost's, right? This is a ghost's gun. But anyway, you guys know that this is something that is a thing that is out there where they're asking neighbors to report on the people to report on their neighbors for doing something that, by the way, is completely and wholly legal, right? So I want to have some friends on the program today to talk a little bit about this, and I especially want to invite them because one of them was actually quoted in this article that I was reading. So I want to welcome to the program Klint, Marco, and Matt Mallory of Meet the Pressers. Gentlemen, how are we doing today?
Awesome.
Good. Thanks for having us on, Craig.
Excellent. So, Matt, you were quoted in this particular piece that was on Truth About Guns. And I'm curious, when they reached out to you, were you somewhat familiar with this at all?
Yeah, I deal with it as far as law enforcement, training law enforcement in New York, and then obviously being an FFL and dealing in guns. I have people always asking questions about it, and I've built my own ghost guns in the past as well. They're scary. But so I've got a little bit of experience with it. I've been on the radio and TV locally talking about it. Every time the DA comes out and says something regarding ghost guns, I usually correct him in a public format. So, now that I think about it, that might be why he won't have lunch with me. Anyway.
Now, let me ask you guys. I mean, what are first of all, I'm assuming, I know in California, you're required to, if you're going to do a home build, first of all, home builds are legal, but we have to actually contact the Department of Justice, go through a background check, and get a serial number for the firearm before we can do it. What are the laws in New York relating to home build of firearms? Well, I guess for both of you, first of all, let's go with New York, and then I want to ask about Pennsylvania.
Definitely. So there's up until recently, there was nothing illegal about doing that. You could do a home build. You could do it, buy an 80% lower, bring it in, mill it out, build the gun yourself. Even though in that article that you're referencing, the DA said that that's what makes it illegal once you do that, and that's not the case. It's federally legal, and the state it was legal as well. But the state's attorney general, she actually sent a cease and desist letter to, I think, 9 or 19, a bunch of different companies that make ghost guns that make 80% lowers. I hate saying ghost guns, but and to tell them that they're not allowed to sell to New York anymore. And the funny thing is that you've got all these people in Syracuse that are now buying them and selling them out of houses, which has increased since the riots, or even more so since COVID. And I guess they didn't get the Attorney General's letter. I mean, these criminals are just, they should stop doing it, right? Shouldn't they stop making 80% lowers into fully functioning guns? I mean, you'd think that they'd abide by what the Attorney General is saying.
Well, unless the Attorney General is full of a bunch of hooey.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so Klint, let me ask you, what's the law there in Pennsylvania?
Well, up until recently, it's been no big deal. I mean, just like everywhere else, you could get an 80% lower and manufacture it at your home. It's not a problem. The only time, as I understand it, the only time you would need a serial number on it would be if you were going to do some type of transfer with it, if you sold it to somebody later on. But last December, our Attorney General Shapiro passed an edict that basically said that all 80% lowers had to be run through the PIC system here in Pennsylvania. We have the Pennsylvania InstaCheck. We don't use the NIC system that's used everywhere else in the country, and the PIC system needs to go. That's a whole other show that we could talk about at some point in time. It's a de facto registration. But there is no statutory law that I'm aware of that says that there is anything wrong with building one or making an 80% lower. However, the edict that was passed by Shapiro made it illegal in his eyes, and the Pennsylvania State Police started confiscating a lot of inventory from different stores and from people at gun shows. And so because of that, Firearms Policy Coalition has sued the Attorney General, and I'm not sure what the status of that case is at this point in time. So it's kind of an ongoing thing. But to my knowledge, there is absolutely no statutory law that prohibits any law-abiding Pennsylvania from making their own gun by buying an 80% lower or that type of thing.
Well, it's interesting that you point out, because I think what you guys mentioned is, I think, very similar to what's happened in California and I think in other states, where you have people who are in the executive branch just all of a sudden making law out of nowhere and then deciding to then enforce it. Now, I don't know. History, law may not necessarily be my thing, constitutional, but I always thought that I never thought that the executive branch was the one who actually was responsible for making law. Am I wrong in that?
I recall something from civics class that they're supposed to enforce the laws that are on the books, not make new ones. And, as Matt said, criminals don't really pay much attention to the law. And it seems that the executive branch doesn't either. They just make up their own.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it seems to be a thing that's not, unfortunately, not just relegated to the Democratic Party or to one side, but both sides seem to be doing it. As I note, whenever I talk about the president and the bump stock ban, but it seems to be that they're just making up law. They don't really care about what their role in government is. They figure if they can't get the legislature to do what they want, then they're just going to do what they want.
Well, that happened here in New York with the whole SAFE Act. When the SAFE Act got passed, it was you're supposed to permanently pin your magazine not to take more than 7 rounds. Everybody was in an uproar about it, and then the governor's like, okay, fine, just don't put more than 7 in it. It's like, you can't just change a law that you just made by, an edict, by waving your wand. It's ridiculous. But that's how we're living here in New York. I mean, even with the bail reform now, it's a catch and release. Somebody does something bad, release them. Let them go. I was meeting with a fellow officer a few weeks ago, and he said that they literally arrested somebody 3 times in one night for heinous crimes, but they weren't at that level where they could detain them. Arrested them, released them.
There was actually a story in California where an individual stole a car, was released, stole another car, was released, went back, stole the same car, and was released, and until he eventually assaulted somebody. Then they eventually held him after the 4th time. So let me just, now, you're being an officer. Now, that was one of the things that was noted in this particular story, A Truth About Guns, was, as you noted, ghost guns, or at least the home-built firearms without serial numbers, is not really the big issue, is it?
Back when I was interviewed, and I think the interview that Kat was referring to was when I was interviewed on TV, based on the DA's response. It wasn't as bad, and I did poll a bunch of different law enforcement officers that I went to the academy with, that I trained with, and I also trained. And most of them came back and said the bigger issue is scratched off serial numbers, so defaced guns that have a defaced serial number. Though, just like everything, because of shortages, because of people being pent up because of COVID and all that, and all the violence going on because of the riots. Everything's really exploded as far as ammunition sales, gun sales. So we are seeing now a tick up in this area of people actually buying 80% lowers. There was a house, I don't remember what the number was, but one of my law enforcement buddies I went to the academy with, he said that they busted a house here in Syracuse that had a ton of 80% guns that were milled out and turned into fully functioning guns, which that everything is on the increase. Everything's on the rise. The criminals were already doing illegal things, so let's hold them responsible. But banning 80% lowers because we don't want the criminals to get them obviously isn't working. So banning them is not going to stop the criminals. It's going to stop legal, law-abiding citizens from building a gun to use to defend themselves against the criminals.
Well, in addition to the fact that, I mean, especially with 3D printers and the increased improvement of 3D technology when it comes to firearms. I mean, the fact is that if someone really if someone really wants a gun, they're going to get a gun.
Yep.
And I just find it odd that people are so, we'll stop this and we'll stop that. But all the laws they put in place do nothing but stop law-abiding citizens from being able to obtain a firearm.
Exactly.
Well, and so many of these crimes are committed by repeat offenders. It's a failing of government that these folks are able to be out in the street and do the things that they do anyhow. So rather than enforce the laws that they have, rather than actually hold real criminals accountable, what do? They transfer all that off and treat the law-abiding citizen as if they are the criminal. And there you have it.
Oh, well, now why would we want to hold criminals responsible for their actions? Do you not know that they are victims of society?
Yeah, well.
Do you not realize that they have been, marginalized, and it doesn't even taste right coming out of my mouth.
So with this whole bail reform in New York, that's a good example, and goes along with what Klint just said. When you talk about, you see an issue with people getting a speedy trial. I get it. I understand. People shouldn't be in jail. They shouldn't be locked up in jail or prison waiting for a trial. I totally understand. I get that. I wouldn't want any of my friends or family members waiting on the judicial system to catch up to them. But why not put the money towards that? Put the money towards hiring on more people. Put the money towards being able to come up with an automated system like vehicle and traffic stuff that they can do through the mail or whatever, versus actually having people come in and then clogging up the entire court system. Put the money towards that. Don't put the money towards, let's do a bail reform and let these people out of jail when we know the major majority of them are guilty, to go do more crimes. And then put more of a tax on law enforcement, who are already understaffed and defunded in a lot of cases now because of another great initiative that these crazy people are putting forward. It just makes no sense. The issue's with the judicial system, not with the other stuff.
Well, no, and I agree. And, I'll tell you, FPC, we make it a point. We like to say, we're not a law enforcement group. We're not a law enforcement support group. We're not a public safety organization. We are a Second Amendment civil rights advocacy group. So what we do is we stand up for the rights of gun owners, and for people who wish to exercise, or maybe one day will want to exercise their fundamental rights. But what we're finding is that it appears like gun owners are being treated like criminals. Mm-hmm. And all of the people who they claim they want to stop, they're being treated like victims. Mm-hmm. And, at a certain point, you just have to say, bull.
Enough's enough.
Yeah, I hear you. So let me ask you guys. There seems to be, at least in my opinion, something really sinister in this whole quote-unquote snitch culture, where they're trying to get citizens to snitch on one another, in this case, dealing with firearms. I mean, what do you guys think about that?
I think that's something we're going to see more and more of. I mean, if you look at the types of politicians and elected officials that are promoting these type of snitch rules, whether they be, red flag laws or in this case, snitch on your neighbor who's building a gun, those folks are also the ones that are starting to promote a narrative of like gutting law enforcement. So what better way for them to continue to act out their plans by recruiting from the snitch culture and getting people to tattletale on their fellow neighbors? And if you look at the people that are buying into that mindset, a lot of them are the folks that are just now starting to be of age to vote, who have lived their entire life in a post 9/11 world, like post Patriot Act. So they didn't know what the world was like before that, and they've been conditioned and trained to snitch on their neighbor if they see something funny, or snitch on their neighbor if they see something that is, quote, hurtful. And so I think as those folks get older and take on more positions of leadership in the world, I think we're going to see more and more of that stuff.
Well, I think there's something additional to that. And that's that, and this is unfortunately, this is the side on the right side, or the conservative side of this, is there's always this dichotomy amongst conservatives between liberty and security, supporting law enforcement versus protecting the rights of individuals. And there's always like this balancing act politically. And so in many cases, when you have law enforcement say they want these tools, or they want to encourage people to do these things, sometimes you have people who are people that I would ideologically agree with on most things, will step up and say, well, yeah, we need to be able to do that. Because keep in mind, the Patriot Act was passed with overwhelming Republican support. I mean, I just think that ultimately it's not just the people who are seeking to take away our fundamental right to keep and bear arms, but there's also the security squad out there, or movement out there that's that's kind of leaning towards, look, let's give up a little bit of liberty in order to get some security.
Yeah, but it's always the theater of security. And I mean, it's the theater of health and security with COVID. I mean, we're seeing all those same kind of things take place with businesses that are operating without making masks mandatory, whatever. I mean, that could be a whole other subject of a conversation.
Yes, it can.
It's a reminiscence of Nazi Germany, right? Snitch on your neighbor, you get extra ration.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's funny. If you study history, you'll see a lot of things that happen again. And unfortunately, we don't study history anymore like we used to. I think as a nation.
Yeah, those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it.
I think someone said that once before. It's pretty profound.
Yeah, I didn't learn from
Craig just did.
All right. So, hey, do me a favor. Let the folks know a little bit about your program, Meet the Pressers, and where they can find you guys.
Go ahead, Klint.
All right, sure. Meet the Pressers. We're on YouTube. If you go onto youtube.com/Meet the Pressers, you'll find our show. And Meet the Pressers is a safe place for people for trigger pressers, folks that are into firearms, to congregate, fellowship, and talk about guns, training, gear, gadgets, political activism, and sometimes religion. And we've had a wide array of different guests on the show. Craig, you've been on the show. Actually, it was one of our better episodes, I think. And we've had trainers, we've had politicians, we've had all kinds of political activists, you name it. And actually even some good old just regular Americans who have stepped up and defended themselves or somebody else using a firearm for righteous defense of life. And so it's a pretty cool show, I have to say. I'm very proud of what Matt and I have done in a very short amount of time. And we're approaching now our third season, and we'll check it out.
Fantastic. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on the program. I very much appreciate you guys. I appreciate the work that you guys do. You guys going to plan on being at SHOT in January?
If they have it.
Yeah.
I'm a hoping and a praying.
Yeah, we too.
Anyway, gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on the program. Ladies and gentlemen, Matt Mallory and Klint Marco, Meet the Pressers. Gentlemen, thank you. All right, folks. Well, hey, that's going to be it for today's Coffee with Craig. We very much appreciate you guys tuning in. We appreciate you liking and sharing the program and telling your friends about the Firearms Policy Coalition. We are the home in the fight for civil rights. Got to use them or you're going to lose them. You guys take care.
If you like our videos, follow, subscribe, like, and share.